Hello and welcome to the Arise interview, 60 minutes of multifaceted discussion where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things, and we feature the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Aniagolu. Coming up in the next hour, Brazil in the 21st century has become a major global player. With a booming economy and massive social changes, there is a swagger to this once sleeping giant. But what do we know of it apart from football and carnival? We'll speak exclusively to the Brazilian Foreign Minister Ernesto Araujo about his country's relations with Nigeria and Africa, about the global alarm raised over the burning of the Amazon rainforest, and the feeling that President Jair Bolsonaro is prioritizing economic exploitation over environmental protection. And later, as the UN marks International Universal Health Coverage Day, aimed at raising awareness of the need for strong and resilient health systems and accelerating progress towards universal health coverage, we ask how committed is Nigeria and other African countries to making bigger and smarter investments in health. In a moment. Now, Brazil is South America's most influential country, a rising economic power, and one of the world's biggest democracies. A former Portuguese colony, Brazil has a highly diverse population, including indigenous Americans and the descendants of African slaves and European settlers. Over the past few years, it has made major strides in its efforts to raise millions out of poverty, although the gap between rich and poor remains wide. Brazil has been keen to develop stronger trade and cultural ties with African countries, particularly Nigeria. And in furtherance of that, the Brazilian Foreign Minister, Ernesto Araujo, has been visiting Abuja, holding bilateral talks on trade, investment and defense. Well, he's been speaking exclusively to Arise News about his visit to Nigeria and a lot more. We'll hear from him in a moment. But first, here's a brief profile of Brazil.
Brazil is a country known for its infectious culture and its amazing landscapes, but it is also a country that is growing in global importance. It is the largest country in South America, and by far it has the largest and fastest growing economy in the region, with a growth rate of 5% per year. Brazil is the 5th largest country in the world, with a total land area of 8,515,766 square kilometers. That makes it slightly larger than Australia and slightly smaller than the USA. It is also the world's 5th most populous country, with 205,338,000 people. It is the world's longest country from north to south, with a total length of 4,395 kilometers, so it shares land borders with 10 countries in South America. To the east, Brazil's coastline is 7,491 kilometers long, making it the longest continuous coastline in the world. The country is also pretty big from east to west, big enough to span 4 time zones. Brazil's climate is largely tropical, but because the country is so large and because it has a variety of elevations, the climate differs from one region to another. The north of the country is located on the equator and has a tropical climate with warm temperatures that vary little throughout the year and rainfall year-round. The central plateau is at a higher elevation, so it has slightly lower temperatures, especially at night. And it is further from the equator, so it has more seasonal variation and a definite dry season. Closer to the south of the country, around and below the Tropic of Capricorn, the seasonal differences are more extreme, with hotter summer temperatures and colder winter temperatures. Every year there is snowfall in some of the towns and the higher areas in the southern region. This is quite different from the typical image of Rio de Janeiro, isn't it? This southern area accounts for about 10% of the country. The coastal plains are generally warm and tropical year-round.
A little snippet of Brazil there. Well, the Brazilian Foreign Minister Ernesto Araujo has been speaking exclusively to Arise News about his visit to Nigeria. He's also been speaking about the exploitation of the Amazon rainforest, much of which is in Brazil and which has been a major international worry. The vast wilderness is a vital regulator of the climate, and in August, a global alarm was raised over the number of forest fires burning there. The feeling seemed to be that President Jair Bolsonaro was prioritizing economic exploitation over environmental protection. Well, the Brazilian Foreign Minister Ernesto Araujo attempted to address all those issues in our exclusive chat. Take a listen. Minister Araujo, thank you very much indeed for coming to Arise News. When most people think of Brazil, football and carnival come to mind. What is it about Brazil that we don't know that we should know?
Well, first of all, we have a new government since January the 1st. We still feel new, it's already almost 1 year, but we are introducing lots of economic reforms, mainly. So today I think we can think also about economic growth. We are starting a new cycle of growth in Brazil, which we hope will be a lasting one and sustainable one. But also our industrial capacity. We are increasing a lot our presence in worldwide markets. Of course, our agribusiness sector. So this whole economic side, it's a thriving economy. Brazilians are creative, entrepreneurial people who were a little bit suffocated by the wrong policies for a long time. And we're trying to liberate this sort of creative energy.
Depending on which politics you you espouse to.
No, yeah, but I mean, the results of a certain set of policies has been stagnation, has been a lack of economic performance. Some of the successful, to a certain extent, social programs are, I mean, they're still there, but what happened was that people, they were not sustainable, so many people were raised to the middle class, and then they fell again into poverty because the economy didn't generate the jobs and the sustainability. But so overall, we want to present this story of a much more competitive and open Brazil.
Well, we're going to talk a bit more about the government and what you're doing in Brazil, but let's talk about the purpose of your visit to Nigeria. I understand you've been having bilateral talks here.
Yes, yes. No, it's been a splendid visit here. I had the honor of being with the Vice President, Foreign Minister, Trade Minister, and also with the President of the ECOWAS Council. So a very interesting, very productive set of meetings, which we intend as a way of building a new relationship on a different level with Nigeria.
And you talk about building a new relationship. How would you characterize the existing relationship between Nigeria and Brazil?
It's excellent in political terms, still very below its potential in economic and other areas. So that's where we want to work more with. We, of course, have a tremendously important cultural base, and I mean, we so many Brazilians have their ancestry here in Nigeria. So there's still links. The Yoruba people in Brazil with their cousins here in Nigeria. So this is not trivial. That's something that really represents a base that we don't have with many countries, that sort of people interaction and commonality. This is the base for something else, of course. But economic potential is enormous. We're still below that. We realize how thriving the Nigerian economy is now. The whole African economy, it's the continent that grows the most in the world. I think Nigeria just became the largest economy in Africa. We're paying a lot of attention to that. So we need to explore those possibilities. We're working on that. We're going to organize next year a high-level meeting between the two vice presidents.
Yes, I was going to ask you that, because there's something I read called the high-level strategic dialogue mechanism, which is a rather complicated term, but it's scheduled for March 2020. Just tell us about that and why you maintain that level of strategic dialogue with Nigeria.
Fantastic. This is to show how special this relationship is. The idea was very good back in, I think, a few years ago when it was created. We held the first meeting in Brazil, but we need to put more flesh into it to deliver results. It's a mechanism where the vice presidents of both countries coordinate several agencies under the let's say the guidance of the foreign ministries, I think. And to try to put the political push, high-level political push into those initiatives. So we inaugurated it a few years ago. We still didn't deliver the results. That's what we intend for next year. So it's a way of signaling how we don't have that with many countries, with only a handful of countries, that sort of high-level dialogue. So that's to show the priority that we attribute to Nigeria. And inside that new strategy, that new vision for Nigeria, for Africa, we want to make it a cornerstone of that strategy.
I'm talking about the relationship, anecdotally, the relationship between Nigeria and Brazil. I don't know if you know this, but the idea for the capital, Abuja, came from Brasilia. When you started building a brand new capital, people in Nigeria thought, wow, let's build a brand new capital as well. So anecdotally, there's a link between sort of Brasilia and the idea of building a spanking new capital. But what sort of trade and economic relations is there at present between Nigeria and Brazil?
Wonderful. Well, we have the oil business where, of course, we're both big players. Nigeria more than Brazil, but Brazil is becoming one of the key players in oil and gas with the recent findings there. So this is a key sector. Defense industry, defense products, and the defense services sector is enormously important already and will become more so. Yesterday, by the way, we held a meeting of business people and authorities about the defense industry possibilities, so this is very strong. And agriculture, of course, Brazil is an important agricultural exporter, but not only exporter, and also we have a plan that we're developing with Nigeria of technology transfer and heavy investment in agricultural machinery and production in Nigeria from Brazil. We just have to sort out how to do it, the financial architecture for that. But that's one of the also the key sectors for us. It's not only selling our agricultural products from there, but investing in agriculture in Nigeria. We realize how important this is for the Nigerian government.
Absolutely.
So that's, I would say, those sectors are the main ones we have right now.
Well, I'm going to get back to talk about the economic trade relationship between Brazil and Nigeria, but is this your first visit to Nigeria as a foreign minister? And if so, what are your first impressions?
Yes.
Honestly.
Yes. First visit as foreign minister and first visit at all.
Right.
First of all, it's a lovely capital. It has a lot to do with Brasilia. We feel the atmosphere and the planning of the city. Excellent impression. First of all, the people. Really been very well received, my whole delegation here. It's interesting, we talked to the authorities. After 5 minutes, it seems like you've been friends for a long time. There's an automatic connection, I think, which has to do with this stronger, deeper Brazilian-Nigerian ties. And the country is obviously a thriving economy with the challenges that are similar to those we face in Brazil. You can see that, but I think those are, if I can say so, good problems, good challenges, because the challenges of young nations, young people wanting to have jobs, to work, to create. You can see that in the atmosphere. So excellent first impressions.
So you talked about the commonalities between Brazil and Nigeria culturally. One thing that really fascinates me about Brazil is something called Candomble.
Yes.
Which is an Afro-Brazilian religion that was established in Brazil by the slave communities, and which has different traditions according to which part of Africa one originates from. And it wasn't allowed to be practiced, I understand, during the period of slavery. So they paired their deities with Catholic saints, and then they worship the saints. So it's a bit like what they have in Cuba called Santeria. Is that right?
It is. It's also a thriving expression of religious feeling and cultural feeling of Brazilian people. It has a lot to do with the Brazilian soul, this way of integrating cultures, traditions, different faiths. It's a very strong expression of faith that is basically a Brazilian creation. It's interesting because it's practiced by many people, not all of them of African descent, many people who don't have African ancestors.
It's become part of Brazilian culture.
It has.
Right.
It's concentrated on the northeast, where you have a lot of African community, but not in other places of Brazil as well. So yes, it's kind of an original creation that expresses this ability that Brazilian people have, this capacity of peacefully and creatively integrating different traditions.
Now, as we say in Nigeria, now that we've licked the corners of the soup, let's dive straight into the middle of it. Now, there's a lot of concern internationally about the Amazon rainforest. It is a regulator of the world's climate, and global alarm was raised in August over the number of forest fires burning in the Amazon. And the feeling was that President Jair Bolsonaro was prioritizing economic exploitation over environmental protection. How credible is that feeling?
It's not what's happening in Brazil. It's good to have the opportunity to talk about that. Our perception, our diagnostics about the situation in the Amazon is you need protection, and the protection is there. We didn't change any piece of legislation, and it's being enforced, in some cases more than before. It's a challenge to enforce that. The Amazon is more than 4 million square kilometers. So, but the legislation is there, the enforcement is there. What was lacking, and we're working with, is the economic side. 20 million people live in the Brazilian Amazon. They need jobs, they need opportunities, and in many cases those jobs are not there, those opportunities are not there. Those people then have to resort to illegal activity, illegal logging, illegal mining, for example. So the plan is to create sustainable projects in a much more decisive way, with basically both with domestic and international financing towards what we call the bioeconomy projects in the area of sustainable exploitation of some natural resources. For example, we already have a very competitive cosmetics company with Brazilian technology, Brazilian capital, which works with Amazon essences and extracts. Just to give an example of the things we can do, creating good jobs and preserving the forest at the same time. We can talk about ecotourism. We can talk about many other activities in this bioeconomy.
Well, there won't be much ecotourism if you're burning the forest down, will there?
Yeah, but it's not happening. What's happened is that every year you have fires during the dry season.
Yeah, we know that. Yeah. It's just that the fires we saw were unprecedented.
Yeah, no, they were not. They were not. We were below average, slightly below average for the last 20 years. That's where we have satellite data for. We were much below fires in the years of previous governments that didn't get any criticism because of different reasons, I think. About 10 years ago or more, we're less than half what they had back in 2005, more or less, which was a government that, for some reason, had better press around the world. Right? The data for after we started actually working on the fire suppression, which didn't happen last year with previous administration or previous administrations. The figures for September, after we started that effort, are much below average. So the idea that what happened was that people tend to think on top of very limited information. So what happened in that case is people saw one or two pictures of the forest burning and thought this is the whole picture. And one of those pictures that were broadcast, that was tweeted by a certain European leader, was a picture of 20 years ago. So and this became a big scandal.
But the president, Jair Bolsonaro, is himself a pretty polarizing figure, both inside and outside Brazil. I mean, he defended the military dictatorship in Brazil, which alarmed many Brazilians. He's called for the relaxation of gun laws in Brazil, and internationally he's talked about the possibility of withdrawing from the 2015 Paris Climate agreement. I mean, does all that make your life more difficult as foreign minister, traveling around the world in defense of Mr. Bolsonaro's policies?
Yeah, no, it makes my life more interesting, I think, because we feel we are working to defend Brazilian interests and the values of Brazilian
But you can see why people get nervous when he says he
Yeah.
wants to withdraw from the climate
Yeah.
agreement, and then
Yeah,
the
exactly.
fires are burning in the Amazon.
Yeah, exactly. Look, Paris Agreement. What you have today is lots of commitments that Brazil, other countries made. Brazil made some of the most ambitious national defined commitments back in 2015. And there's a counterpart from developing countries that should put the money there, right? We could already expect a $100 billion fund for developing nations, among them, very especially Brazil. This money is not there, not at all, not even close, right? So our position now in the negotiations that are taking place in Madrid is, well, Brazil is totally in with its commitments. What we need is the counterpart. So we question the balance of the agreement.
Yeah, but is he threatening to withdraw from the agreement, President Bolsonaro?
No, not threatening to withdraw, but we need to address the real issues with
Right,
the agreement.
I understand that, but within the last day or so, the teenage climate activist Greta Thunberg has added her voice to growing international condemnation of a surge of what's been described as anti-indigenous violence in the Amazon. She said that indigenous people are literally being murdered for trying to protect the forest from illegal deforestation. You say it's them who are doing it illegally. They say there's illegal deforestation that's practically murdering them. And they say that President Bolsonaro is green-lighting that with his hardline anti-environment rhetoric. How true is that?
Not at all. It's a lie. That's why my life is interesting, because we can fight for the truth, right? The truth is completely different from that. And it's amazing because today in the world, with so much information going around, so many sources of information, people fall for that sort of thing, which has no base in reality, right? We had an unfortunate case of two indigenous people that died a few days ago. We're investigating that.
Yeah, the two people who were shot.
Yes,
basically.
we're investigating that. I mean, and of course, this has to be the crime we have to address. There's no official policy at all to tolerate any sort of aggression against indigenous or the rainforest. So this is a total construct. And if you go to Brazil, if anyone goes to Brazil and studies the real situation, he or she would see that it's totally different from the reality. Indigenous lands are 14% of the Brazilian territory. The challenge is how to avoid the resources there to be illegally used. What we want is to have the right policies for mining, for example, to be done legally in the benefit of the indigenous communities and, of course, other partners in that sort of exploration. That's also another issue that we have to address. Indigenous people's leaders have come to us, to the government, to ask for that to be allowed, because today they sit on top of very rich lands and they cannot do anything, and they have to, in many cases, see illegal activity going on, and not to their benefit. So it's an unfortunate set of declarations,
well, you
speeches
said,
here and there.
Right, you said one should go to Brazil
Yes.
and ask and find out what the truth is. I mean, Ms. Thunberg is not the only one saying that there is a spike in the destruction of the rainforests and attacks on indigenous communities. I mean, Brazil's Indigenous Missionary Council, which is a rights group, recently reported that 153 indigenous territories had been invaded this year alone, which is twice last year's figure of 76. And they say Mr. Bolsonaro's aggressive talk was at least partly responsible.
It's not true. Simply not true. Those people have political interests. They are linked to parties that were in power for almost 20 years, and that did actually very little to protect those people. They talked a lot. They have good rhetoric that resonated well with the developed world, but didn't didn't do a lot for the Brazilian people. Those people created a system of corruption in Brazil, of crime linked to organized crime, to drug trafficking. They stimulated the same sort of regime in other countries in South America. They are linked to the situation now in Venezuela. They helped produce that sort of silent genocide that is going on in Venezuela. People are starving because of their government policies. Brazil, unfortunately, under different governments, helped finance that. So that's what we are up against. We're up against a system that is very strong and that has connections to media, and especially in the developed world, and they deliberately spread the wrong message in Brazil. Why? Because they want power back in Brazil, to come back to corruption, to come back to those links to organized crime. That's the bottom line. I mean, the world is uglier than Ms. Thunberg thinks.
Well, let's return to your visit to Nigeria and the opportunities that you see here. Brazil at one stage had been considering importing gas from Nigeria to reduce its dependence on purchasing gas from Bolivia. What is the state of play there?
Yes, yeah, no, Bolivia is our very big provider of gas now. Argentina is developing their gas reserve, so South America can become, I think, self-sufficient in gas. We have a lot of potential that we're not exploring yet in natural gas. We're basically burning the gas.
Well, the same thing Nigeria is doing, basically.
Exactly. So, but we can totally, I think, cooperate in that with a view of maybe third markets. But in any case, I mean, we have to change a little bit our relationship in that area, our strategy, because Brazil, which were a net importer, now we're becoming a net exporter of oil and gas products. Some people say that in 10, 15 years, Brazil could be among the 3-4 largest exporters of oil in the world because of the way now we're approaching the exploration of our reserves. So I think we have to evolve from a situation where we were basically in an asymmetrical way to be in a more cooperative relationship.
Well, I mean, we're almost out of time. We've got less than a minute to go. But what message will you be taking home to Brazil about Nigeria?
That we need to do more, that we are on the right track, that Nigeria can become one of our main partners, not only in Africa, but in the world. We have to invest in the very promising sectors that are open here. We need new ideas. Those ideas about investing in agricultural production in Nigeria, for example, that's a new idea. The whole defense industry, for example. So that message. Also a partner in security and defense across the South Atlantic, something that we didn't talk about here, but it's an important dimension of our trip to the country. We're very concerned about how the South Atlantic is becoming a corridor for illegal activity there again, and drug trafficking, for example. So the coordination among South Atlantic countries and with Brazil and Nigeria as very important players is also important for us, and I also bring the message of that we share this concern. So so basically I take that we are on the right track with our vision of a relationship based on culture, trade and investment, and defense and security.
Okay, Ernesto Araujo, Brazilian Foreign Minister, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, pleasure to be here.
And of course, Ernesto Araujo was speaking exclusively to Arise News there. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead, including as the UN marks International Universal Health Coverage Day, we ask how committed are African countries to making bigger investments in health. Stay with us.